Hey, welcome back everyone to the Progressive Brothers podcast. This is episode 38. Please hit the like button as you come in, share the video if possible, and hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Progressive Brothers podcast. Also, make sure you check us out on Twitter at brothers_podcast. So there's been a lot of discussion in the recent week and a half about the uprisings in different countries such as Cuba, Haiti, and South Africa. And so people have been asking me my take on this, and I haven't been able to jump on too many panels to actually have that discussion. So I want to make sure I give my 2 cents on this and my thoughts, because I think it's important that there is some context behind a lot of all of this. So let's start with the Monroe Doctrine. It's important that people understand what the Monroe Doctrine is. And this is from ourdocuments.gov. President James Monroe's 1823 annual message to Congress contained the Monroe Doctrine, which warned European powers not to interfere in the affairs of the Western Hemisphere. Understandably, the United States has always taken a particular interest in its closest neighbors, the nations of the Western Hemisphere. Equally understandably, expressions of this concern have not always been favorably regarded by other American nations. The Monroe Doctrine is best known as U.S. policy towards Western Hemisphere, buried in a routine annual message delivered to Congress by President James Monroe in December 1823. The doctrine warns European nations that the United States would not tolerate further colonialization or puppet monarchs. The doctrine was conceived to meet major concerns of the movement, but it soon became a watchword of U.S. policy in the Western Hemisphere. And so I'm not going to read the whole thing because I think it's important that people actually understand the backstory on this, that the Monroe Doctrine is used to govern the Caribbean and Latin America, basically everything under the U.S. border. And so U.S. foreign policy has been based largely on the Monroe Doctrine, and why you're seeing U.S. military bases in different areas outside of our borders in the Caribbean and Latin America and Central America, for what is known. And so let's go to Haiti, right? Haiti is basically the first Western country to be formalized as a nation state after the United States in 1804. The United States was formulated around after 1776, around 1780, with the Constitution that was written. And so you're talking about 20 to 28 years after the fact that the United States became a nation. They also became a nation after overthrowing their colonial masters, which was France under Napoleon. And so what we're looking at right here is history.state.gov, US invasion and occupation of Haiti from 1915 to 1934. And so this happened under Woodrow Wilson, President Wilson. Let me read this real quick. The United States government's interest in Haiti existed for decades prior to its occupation. As a potential naval base for the United States, Haiti's stability concerned US diplomatic and defense officials who feared Haitian instability might result in foreign rule of Haiti. In 1868, President Andrew Johnson suggested the annexation of the island of Hispaniola, consisting of Haiti and the Dominican Republic, to secure a U.S. defensive and economic state in the West Indies. From 1889 to 1891, Secretary of State James Blaine unsuccessfully sought a lease of Mont Saint Nicolas, a city on Haiti's northern coast, strategically located for a naval base. In 1910, President William Taft granted Haiti a large loan in hopes that Haiti could pay off its international debt, thus lessening foreign influence. The attempt failed due to the enormity of the debt and the internal instability of the country. France, as the former colonizer of Haiti, retained strong economic and diplomatic ties with the Haitian government. In the 1824 Franco-Haitian Agreement, France agreed to recognize Haitian independence if Haiti paid a large indemnity. This kept Haiti in a constant state of debt and placed France in a position of power over Haiti's trade and finance. Although unhappy about Haitians' close connection to France, the United States became increasingly concerned with heightened German activity and influence in Haiti. At the start of the 20th century, German presence increased, with German merchants establishing trade branches in Haiti that dominated commercial business in the area. German men married Haitian women to get around laws denying foreigners land ownership and establish roots in the community. The United States considered Germany its chief rival in the Caribbean and feared German control of Haiti would give them a powerful advantage in the region. As a result of increased instability in Haiti in the years before 1915, the United States heightened its activity to deter foreign influence. Between 1911 and 1915, 7 presidents were assassinated or overthrown in Haiti, increasing U.S. policymakers' fear of foreign intervention. In 1914, the Wilson administration sent U.S. Marines into Haiti. They removed $500,000 from the Haitian National Bank in December of 1914 for safekeeping, quote unquote, in New York, thus giving the United States control of the bank. In 1915, Haitian President Jean Gilliam was assassinated, and the situation in Haiti quickly became unstable. In response, President Wilson sent the U.S. Marines to Haiti to prevent anarchy. In actuality, the act protected U.S. assets in the area and prevented a possible German invasion. So when people talk about the instability in Haiti being the Haitians' fault, this is a misnomer. And the reason why this is a misnomer is because they're not taking into consideration the outside influence that has impacted the island since its inception as a nation state and overthrowing its colonial power, which was France. And so we have to keep this in mind when we have these conversations about what's going on in the Caribbean and outside of the diaspora and within the diaspora itself. So I want to jump to this next piece right here from Brown University, which basically articulates all of the history behind Haiti, but more importantly, it actually gives detail into the United States involvement in Haiti beyond 1915. In December of 1990, Haiti completed its first democratic elections after violence surrounding prior elections caused them to be aborted. Jean Bertrand Aristide, a Catholic priest with tremendous support from the Black poor of the country, was elected with 67% of the vote and took office on February 7th, 1991. On September 29th, 1991, the Haitian military removed him from office and forced him to sign a resignation. He spent the next 3 years in exile, returning in 1994 and serving out his term until February 1996. During the time of his exile, the country was in chaos and its next political elections were not approved by international election commissions. The U.S. military occupied Haiti from 1994 to 1997 in order to establish peace and restore democracy. In 2000, Aristide won another presidential election, garnering over 92% of the votes. The next several years saw violence and political agitation in Haiti. On February 28th, 2004, Aristide was taken from the country by the Haitian and American militaries and flown to South Africa, where he is still in exile. What's important is that he's actually 2 days ago, the last 48 hours, he has popped his head back up and he is coming back to Haiti now. So keep that in mind. The United States' role in both the coups against Aristide have been disputed. Aristide, among others, claimed the United States was directly involved in his forced removal from the country in 2004. The Haitian military and the Haitian National Intelligence Agency, set up and funded by the CIA in the 1980s, were both key players in the coups against Aristide. And so these sort of things are very much important for people to understand as to how we got here when it comes to Haiti. This is not an accident. This is intentional. The Haitian people do not have the capacity to assassinate their own president under those terms, where they can just walk into a palace and assassinate Jovenel Moïse. And so, what are people really saying here? The president hired a security staff that was not Haitian, who came from the United States, to supposedly protect the president, and they ended up killing this guy 2 days later. Apparently somebody under the terms of DEA came in and knocked on the door, and Haitian security lowered their guns down, allowed these people to walk in and actually kill this guy and shoot his wife. Courageously enough, the wife was actually shot by trying to defend Jovenel himself. And so how does something like this happen? How can the president of a country have less security than, the mayor of New York, or even the mayor of Miami for that matter? How is that possible that a mayor in the United States has more security than the president of a country like Haiti, especially with all the chaos going on? Nothing happens in Western Hemisphere, at least in the Caribbean for that matter, without the say-so in Washington. Somebody gave a green light, as the article or as the historical reference from Brown University articulates, that this Haitian national intelligence, as well as the Haitian military apparatus, has been funded and developed by the CIA. So, with that being said, who are the actors here? You have several actors. You have Claude Joseph, who he is now the acting prime minister. You also have Martel Martini, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He is also a factor in all of this, as he is a deputy within the Haitian Parliament. There is no acting constitution as it stands right now because it's not recognized by the people, so they don't have a functional government. So right now, Haiti is in chaos because of the referendums that have been put in place have not been recognized by the people itself. And so no matter who they put in office, it doesn't matter because they're not being certified by the people itself. They don't have a functional system. So with that being said, who are the other actors? Why does a company called CTU, which is a Israeli-based security firm, having the contract on protecting the president of Haiti, as well as securing the borders between Haiti and the Dominican Republic? And why does who are the oligarchs within the country itself? These are all important questions. Syrian, Lebanese oligarchs, Israeli contractors, high-powered guns on the street with the insignia of IWI, Israeli Weapons Industries. So these sort of things are actually important to understand. And who were these Colombians that were allowed in? How did they get in there? Who verified them, and what was their mode of transportation? How did they get to that point of the presidential palace that they can march that close? You can't do that in any sort of urban city in the United States. You can't get that close to a mayor or a governor or even the president himself, or even maybe sitting politicians. You can't get close to their houses either. And so this is all very important to understand, that the layers of security was absent because you also have a dysfunctional system that's in chaos. Who benefits from this? Cui bono, right? Who benefits? A lot of people benefit from this. The oligarchs may not have wanted Jovenel Moïse flying to Turkey. Why was Jovenel out in Turkey shaking hands with Erdogan and his other diplomats? What was he doing out there? Why was he looking for aid? What was he going to do with the aid? What kind of resources does Haiti have? Oil, gold, potentially gas, iridium. What is iridium used for? Iridium is used on space shuttles and spacecraft and satellites. A lot of questions and very little answers going on, but These are the sort of potential pontifications that have to be put out there, so that people are not distorting the reality that somehow, some way, that the Haitian people just suddenly killed this guy and then they just left their country in chaos. We're not buying that. Why does Hillary Clinton's brother Tony Rodham have contracts inside Haiti for itself? What role do the Canadians play? The French Canadians. A lot of questions and not a lot of answers. So these sort of things need to be pandered out. Why is Aristide coming back now? He's in Cuba getting treatment, if I remember correctly, for some of his illnesses. What is he going to do there? Do the people even want Aristide there? What kind of who's going to monitor these elections? We can't even monitor our own election. These are the sort of questions that we have that have very little answers. So I want to make sure that gets put on the table before I move forward to Cuba. Cuba has these protests going on, and a lot of people are saying it's because of communism, it's because of socialism, it's because of Marxism. Actually, it's because the Trump administration in January 2021 put sanctions at the maximum that any U.S. president has put on Cuba in recent years, have been installed before he even left office. This is around after the insurrection on January 6th. And so this document that I'm reading right now basically articulates U.S. policy in the 116th Congress and through the Trump administration. So what they're talking about here is, let me zoom this in. Since the early 1960s, the centerpiece of U.S. policy toward Cuba has been economic sanctions aimed at isolating the Cuban government. Congress has played an active role in shaping policy towards Cuba, including by enacting legislation strengthening and at times easing U.S. economic sanctions. In 2014, the Obama administration initiated a policy shift away from sanctions and toward a policy of engagement. The shift included the restoration of diplomatic relations, the recession of Cuba's designation as a state sponsor of international terrorism, and an increase in travel, commerce, and the flow of information to Cuba implemented through regulatory changes. President Trump unveiled a new policy towards Cuba in 2017 that involved new sanctions and rolled back some of the Obama administration's efforts to normalize relations. The administration restricted financial transactions with entities controlled by the Cuban military and intelligence and security services. The Cuba restricted list has been updated several times, most recently in January 2021. In September 2017, the State Department reduced the staff of the U.S. Embassy by about 2/3 in response to unexplained health injuries of members of the U.S. diplomatic community in Havana. The reduction affected embassy operations, especially visa processing. By 2019, the administration had largely abandoned engagement and had increased sanctions to pressure the Cuban government on human rights and for its support of the Venezuelan government of Nicolas Maduro. The sanctions imposed from 2019 to January 2021 included a wide array of restrictions, especially on travel and remittances, as well as sanctions targeting Venezuela's oil exports to Cuba, other trade and financial transactions, and the designations of the Cuba government as a state sponsor of international terrorism. So Trump put more sanctions on Cuba as he was leaving office than any other president prior to him. 243 sanctions to be exact. And so between his time of leaving office and Joe Biden taking over as the president to right now, the fallout that you see has been manufactured by the previous administration to cause disruption to overthrow the government, or at least have the people overthrow the government. In reality, all it does is it really chokes off the commodities from the common people on the ground, and not so much the Cuban administration itself. It really just hurts the civilian class on the ground. So the protests that you're seeing are all manufactured right out of Miami itself. A lot of the bracelets and memorabilia that you see that the people are wearing in these videos actually says made in the USA because they were shipped there. How they got it there, I have no idea. But that's what is being that's what's being seen on TV right now, or at least that's what's being seen in the media. And so who benefits from this? The right wing in Florida has a vested interest in seeing regime change in Cuba. There's a lot of money invested by the National Endowment for Democracy, the NED, and U.S. aid in funding these sort of regime change operations in the Caribbean, especially in Cuba. I think over $20 billion has been spent. They spend more money trying to force the socialist government inside Cuba to, change its ideology than to actually subsidize Americans, during the pandemic. You have elected officials debating on whether or not, they should get stimulus checks while they're spending all this money trying to overthrow a government by using aggressive coercion. This is insanity, but they've been trying this since 1960, since the Kennedy administration, and none of the attempts have worked, including assassination attempts, ways of bombing people, or at least bombing the island, the Bay of Pigs, lighting up, putting gunpowder inside Cuban cigars, and trying to find other subtle ways to actually assassinate the leadership within Cuba itself. So all of this is manufactured. I don't take it as seriously as some people make it out to be, that it's Marxism and socialism and it's communism and it, that's the effect of it, because we see communism in other countries and socialism in other countries and it works just fine. In fact, your top 20 countries within the world right now, economically speaking, I think half of them are actually socialist states, including Germany, France, China, Vietnam, Singapore, and a few various others, including the United Kingdom itself. Although United Kingdom doesn't see itself as a socialist state, it does have socialist services at its height. And so the people who have a gripe with socialism are the ones who have a vested interest in trying to see it changed in other countries. So that's where we are right now. When it comes to South Africa, and I'll keep this very brief, Jacob Zuma, who is the former president of South Africa from the African National Congress, he pleaded not guilty to corruption or basically money laundering. He was accused of various money laundering from 1999 over military contracts, as well as with a French company, as well as in his tenure in 2009 to 2011 to 2018, where he was accused of taking billions of dollars, but no one's been able to actually prove this in the state of, in a functional court. And so he pleads not guilty, and the court found him in contempt. And thus, there's outrage in the streets, but the outrage isn't so much with Jacob Zuma, but an ineffective system that creates racial economic inequality on the ground, where 20% of the population, which are white, have access to 75% of the resources of the wealth on the ground. That's a big problem, especially if they only make up 8% of the population. That's an even bigger problem. So people are very angry. You have a pandemic that is keeping businesses closed because of the third wave and possibly fourth wave in South Africa right now in terms of the coronavirus, and that is sparking outrage. People are angry and they want some form of economic justice. So what does this mean overall? I think in a few weeks you'll probably see a lot of those protests go away, as there's a need for people to eat, and they're going to have to actually maybe reach out to the United Nations and UNICEF and a few other international bodies that can actually provide infrastructure support, emergency management support, for South Africa, because of all of the chaos that happened so quickly that they were not prepared for. But this is what happens when you have an apartheid system that largely has not been corrected over the last 28 years. Just because Nelson Mandela took office doesn't necessarily mean that somehow, some way, that apartheid was over. No, the political function was transitioned to a democracy, but the economic transition did not happen at the same time. And so you have a asymmetrical sort of apartheid system where although the leadership is melanated, the economics are still in an apartheid function. So like, share, and subscribe.